Okay, now last but not least, Bob Marion, the Program Executive Officer for Aviation. Welcome him to the stage. He's been in the job a few months, and just like Mike, just jumped in full force and already doing a fabulous job making an impact on our branch.
Thanks, sir. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to spend the next few minutes going over a program update for PEO Aviation, but before I do that, I'd like to say thanks to QuadA for putting on a great event again. These are always fantastic forums for me personally to come to and to have the opportunity to sit down and talk with soldiers and former general officers and legends in our branch and current general officers, and it helps level set me on what's really going on across our community and across this enterprise. So I really appreciate this forum, and I thank QuadA for doing such a fantastic job, and I want to thank all the soldiers and their families who took the time to be here. It does lend a great opportunity for industry and for all of us to get to share and understand your concerns as we move forward in our particular lanes, and mine specifically being the material development lane. You know, before I jump into the slides, I'd like to say one thing that's kind of been, and Congressman Brooks called it the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and it's declining budgets. And every speaker's talked about it, and I have a chart to talk about it also, so I'm not going to miss my opportunity. But, you know, I'll also echo what General Lundy said is, you know, during these times, and I'll put austere in quotes because we are by far, as General Barclay said, the largest portfolio in the Army. So our austere times, every other portfolio in the Army would love to have the austere budget that we do. So embedded in our budget is tremendous opportunity for modernization. And, you know, General Barclay talked about the three legs of the stool: the readiness, personnel and force structure, and modernization, and being out of balance for a while necessarily, as it takes time for the readiness and personnel components to actually achieve some savings. So you take it immediately out of modernization, but still there is opportunity. And you heard the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army specifically mention ITEP by name. And you heard General Lundy talk about ITEP as his #1 priority. So that's a big deal for us, and that's important. And I'll talk about that a little bit later also. But you also heard Ms. Shue, General Barclay, General Lundy, and every opportunity out on the floor, and every time they're up here on the stage, they talk about Joint Multi-Role Tech Demonstrator, and they talk about Future Vertical Lift. So we don't want to forego modernization. We don't want to forget about what the opportunities are that are in front of us, and we have to be diligent, and we have to execute everything we say we're going to in these austere times for our branch in order to be successful, especially when it comes to modernization. So Ms. Shue also talked about this pyramid, and really what she's articulating is our responsibility for life cycle management. And that happens within all of those formations that we interact with every day in AMCOM, in the Army Contracting Command, in the AMRDEC, at Fort Rucker. It's our responsibility to manage systems all the way through the life cycle. She talked about divestment on the bottom end of that pyramid. We talk about recap and sustain at the next level. We talk about modernizing our current platforms. We talk about new programs, and at the top is S&T. And we really have to pay close attention to everything we're doing in that pyramid in order to be successful. In the past, what we've been able to do is use base funding to achieve success. And where we didn't quite get to the finish line, we could get something to theater, or because we were taking it to theater, we could use OCO dollars to make it just right, get to the finish line. Well, that's not going to happen anymore. So we really, really have to pay attention to everything we're doing. Not that we weren't before, but when we put a triangle on a chart and we say we're going to get to the finish line at this date and it's going to cost us this much and this is what it's going to do, we got to get there, because there won't be a chance to throw more money at it later. And someone asked me yesterday, you know, kind of I've been in the job about 3 months, and someone said, what's your takeaway in the first 3 months? What's your focus? What's a priority for you? And, you know, as we, you know, there are a lot a lot of programs that we're bringing into the Army. General Barkley talked about it, that we fielded as quick reaction capabilities over the last dozen years. And we got them to theater because it was the right thing to do. And they enabled soldiers in combat to execute their mission. So it was absolutely the right thing to do. So now we're bringing those systems back, and they're going through the Non-Systems Equipment Requirements Council, and we're determining what are we going to do with those systems. Are we going to divest them? Are we going to keep them and put them in a warehouse somewhere and break glass in case of combat? Or are we going to integrate them into the base budget? And General Collier talked about the big challenge we're having, taking all those previously OCO or wartime replacement funded systems and integrating them into the base. So that's going to be a big challenge for us again moving forward. So my plea and my challenge to all of you is, especially those of you that are wearing a suit and working in industry, is when we come to you and we ask you, here is our RFP, propose back to us what you can do. When we agree, I always say two people sign that contract, right? The government and industry. So both of us have to be 100% confident, committed, and dedicated and disciplined to execute the programs that we say we're going to on schedule and on budget. That's what's going to make us continue to be successful as we move forward. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm off my soapbox now. Next chart. So in PEO Aviation, General Barkley talked about it. Largest portfolio in the Army. And that's a direct reflection on soldiers in combat executing and enabling ground forces. That's the reason why this is the largest portfolio. It's because soldiers have engaged and fought and won with systems that you have developed over the last dozen years. So that's a huge sense of accomplishment, it should be, for everybody in this room. But it should also be a huge challenge to continue to do what you've done over the last dozen years or so. Because while we are the largest portfolio in the Army, that just means we're a huge target. So continue to execute, continue to do what you've done, and we'll continue to be successful. We're able to execute all that with all of our partners from Fort Rucker, from AMCOM, AMRDEC, Army Contracting Command, all the key stakeholders in the Pentagon. It takes this entire aviation enterprise in order to be successful and execute, obligate, and disperse those dollars and deliver capabilities to soldiers' hands. So I appreciate everything that you do. I look forward to continuing to do that during my tenure here as the PEO, and I know we'll continue to do that moving forward. Next chart. So I just put this up here to say we have some new faces since the last time we were at QuadA. We've got, let's see, James Kennedy is the new product director or project director for Armed Scout. I think Rob Berry may have been new, just taken over as we came out of the last QuadA, and Jim Brashear may be new also. But General Collier talked about he and I and the PMs are going to be on the stage this afternoon. So please come and please fire all the hard questions to General Collier and to those PMs, and I'll be the moderator. I'll be running around with the mic, and I'll hand it off to the right person. Got a couple new faces on the PEO staff too. Snuff Thompson is basically my G4. Ray Sellers is the chief engineer, and John Beck is the chief of staff. Next chart. So this is the one budget chart I have, and just a couple things I'd like to point out. If you look on the left-hand side, you'll see our FY14 budget, and this is the 14-18 President's Budget Submit. About $130 billion for the Army, and this is the RDA account. And so you look at the 15-19 President Budget Submit, and it's about 120, so about $10 billion difference. And when you look at specifically in RDA, so the first one's the Army's total obligation authority. The second one is the RDA, and that's about $24 billion, and then going down to about $20 billion. So from 18 to 17% of the total obligation authority of the Army is in the RDA accounts. So that's a significant drop. So then you look at the piece of the pie underneath it in RDA that falls under aviation. So $5.5 billion, 23% of the Army's RDA account in this branch. And then if you go to 15, you can see we dropped $5.4 billion. But really the significant number is the percentage. So even though we've dropped a little bit, you can see we're now 27%, because the overall Army RDA portion of the TOA now has gone down significantly, and ours has only gone down a little bit. So the denominator has gone down significantly. Ours is, in the numerator, has only gone down a little bit. So we are a much larger percentage of the Army's total RDA accounts. So again, a huge recognition of the capability that our formations and our industrial complex delivers. But again, a huge target. So my challenge again is to continue to execute programs with diligence and with precision. When we say we're going to do something, we got to do it. Next chart. So I won't spend a lot of time talking about this, but I will tell you, when I see this chart, it takes me back to 10 years ago. And I've told some of you that on my birthday, 10 years ago, I was a major in the Comanche project office, and we got this notice: go to the theater at Redstone Arsenal, because the military deputy to the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology wants to talk to this formation. And we all knew what was coming because we'd seen CNN, right? So we knew they were canceling the program. So that's the first time I saw a chart that looked like that. And it had all of our missions and functions on the left-hand side: reconnaissance, attack, utility, cargo. And then it had a plan going, had time on the horizontal axis, and said this is what we were going to do, because we were going to cancel Comanche, but we were going to fence the dollars, keep it inside the aviation portfolio, and we're going to fix a lot of things. And so when I look at this chart, I think back about that discussion in the theater. And I think back, here we are almost 10 years to the day, February 23rd, 2004, is when General Yakovac came and talked to us. That's when Comanche was canceled. So if you go backwards from today, back to those 10 years, there's a couple outliers out there, right? ARH, and then C-27, and we can talk about those later at some time if you'd like. But in the end, for the most part, everything we said we were going to do in this portfolio, we have done. And I think anyone looking back on those last 10 years, especially on 10 years of combat, would say that was the right decision. And the people in this room executed those programs and fought those systems in a way that proved that those decisions were right, and we executed. So here we are today, kind of in the same light, right? We're talking about aviation restructure initiatives. We're talking about doing things in our branch that are going to be big changes. So again, I'm going to challenge everyone in here that 10 years from now, someone's going to be standing on this stage, or 20 years from now, someone's going to be standing on this stage, and they're going to put a chart up like that, and we want them to look back on the last 10 to 20 years and say, those people back in 2014, they made the right decisions, they executed the programs they said they were going to execute, they delivered capabilities to our formations, and time and history has proved that they delivered a capability that enabled ground force commanders to go anywhere in the world and execute the missions that they were responsible to do. So we've made a lot of big decisions in the Army. And I'll tell you, the one big difference, and this is a big difference, is, remember I said they fenced all that money in Comanche, and they kept it inside the branch to do the work that we needed to make sure we were successful. Well, for us, again, go back to that if you go back to the pie chart, we have a lot of money in the portfolio. We'd like to have more for a lot of reasons. General Collier talked about all the stuff that we were doing that's outside the base. It's not in the base. So we've got to figure out how to be disciplined and execute. But we're not in the same financial situation that we were 10 years ago. That doesn't mean we still can't execute. It just makes our challenge even tougher. So one thing I would like to talk about on this chart is the bottom fixed wing. So most of the activity that we execute on behalf of the aviation portfolio is done within PEO Aviation, but there's some of it that's not. PEO IEWS manages the sensor capability that we then integrate onto our aviation platforms and deliver a total fixed-wing capability. So that's one thing that's executed outside of PEO Aviation that's part of this portfolio. Go to the next chart, please. So there's 3 other things on this chart. For example, PM JAMS executes the munitions portion of our portfolio inside PEO Missiles and Space, and Colonel Jim Romero is on General Thorogood's team, but a great team player with us, and we appreciate his direct involvement with all of our PMs in executing his mission. The PM for Aircraft Survivability Equipment, that's Colonel Russ Leapart. He also belongs to the PEO for IEWS, Mr. Steve Kreider, and he also, he sits down just like Jim Romero in Missiles and Space sits in Huntsville. Russ Leapart sits in Huntsville also, and is a great team member with us, and goes with us down to Fort Rucker when we brief PCCs, and he's been a great teammate as well. And the last one, Lieutenant Colonel Spence Guida, he belongs to PEO Soldier, even though he's the Air Warrior product manager, but he sits down at Redstone Arsenal with us as well. And so even though we have some parts of our portfolio that are managed within FDV, which is Frank Tate's total portfolio, they fall outside of PEO Aviation. But we don't skip a beat when it comes to executing those programs because we're tied in. Next chart. So I'm going to talk just briefly about each of the project managers. I won't go into a lot of detail because we are going to be on the floor this afternoon, and I ask you to come to that session and fire away at any of the PMs or me or General Collier if you have any questions there. So Colonel James Kennedy, probably a singular most challenging piece of the ARI from an execution standpoint in the materiel lane. Divesting these platforms is a challenge for him as he works through the equipping piece, which is the termination of CASUP, and then the O&M piece, which is the funding, the second destination transportation, and all of the DMIL potential requirements that are going to be levied on OH-58Ds, A's, C's, TH-67s. So he's got a big challenge, and he's been working very well with the AMCOM team to figure out how to move forward, and with all the formations out in the field. So the other thing that General Lundy also talked about was the valid requirement for an armed aerial scout remains. And that's something that we don't lose sight on, and I'll talk a little bit about that when we go to the JMRTD and the Future Vertical Lift program. Next chart. So the Apache program, Colonel Jeff Hager and his team, they do a fantastic job of blocking capabilities, engineering change proposals to the production line in a way that they insert technologies as they move along. So starting back in 1984 when we delivered that first A model till today, when we have 2 units equipped in AH-64Es and AH-64Es deployed in combat for the first time, they've done a great job through AH-64A and then D, Block 1 and Block 2, and now E, of inserting technology as we move along. They've done a great job of continuing to keep that platform relevant, and a big piece, as we talked about earlier, of keeping these systems, this one and Black Hawk, relevant for multiple years to come is ITEP. And I'll talk about that a little later too. Next chart. Aviation Systems, that's Colonel Jerry Davis. This is all the platforms that have common systems. So for example, communication systems, navigation systems, identification systems, all the cats and dogs Jerry has. He's got about 50 different products, all in different various stages of the acquisition life cycle. So a big challenge for him, wide variety of programs. He's got the aviation ground support equipment, he's got air traffic control, he's got a lot of things he's responsible for, and he and his team do a great job working with Mark Mosier down at Fort Rucker on keeping programs aligned to requirements and executing. He's got the ADEC ALEP piece that General Lundy talked about earlier. He's also got one of the key things that's going to help us moving forward, and that's our near-term FACE compliance as part of the real-time, safety-critical, embedded common operating environment. The real near-term ability for us to do that is in the IDM, and that falls under Jerry's portfolio, and he's got a lot of work going on there along with Terry Carlson on basically my G6. A lot of responsibility, a lot of varying products, but doing a great job there. Next chart. So the Cargo Helicopter Project Management Office, Colonel Rob Barry, he and his team, together with Paul Howard at TAPO and Ramsey Bentley at Tickham Lift, have done a great job of kind of following that Apache model where you take capabilities and bundle them together as ECPs and then do a block upgrade. So that's their strategy moving forward, taking enhancements to the system and put it into a blocking strategy so that you can keep the airframe relevant. And we've talked a lot about FVL, talked about the medium class, we've talked about the varying classes as you move through light, medium, heavy, and ultra heavy. And when you think about how long our procurement cycles take in execution, we just simply can't afford to buy all those variants all at the same time, starting in 2035 as an example. So we've pushed off the requirement to buy a replacement heavy or ultra heavy platform till after we address our near-term, more pressing needs. So what that means for this system is Ramsey Bentley and Paul Howard and Rob Barry have to figure out how to keep this platform in our formations for probably through 2050, maybe beyond. And so when you think about the Chinook that first flew in 1962, being around in 2050 or beyond, they have a huge responsibility. So they're talking about a lot of things. So for example, leveraging off the work that we've done between our general purpose forces and our soft forces, we have a 47G that operates at 54,000 pounds, and we have a 47F that operates at 50,000 pounds. So there's some opportunity there potentially to grow the max gross weight in order to accommodate what General Lundy talked about and what we hear all the time, airplanes growing between 50 and 100 pounds a year every year. For all the right reasons, ballistic protection systems, IR countermeasures, engine air particle separators, all the right reasons we grow weight on airplanes, but we have to accommodate for that somehow. So they're doing a great job of working together on how do we figure out how to increase payload on the airframe and do it in a way that we can afford. And so the combination of Army and SOF requirements and capabilities and funding, we think is going to be the answer for this airplane moving forward. So they have a lot of work ahead of them. They've done a great job. They are marching hand in hand through the Pentagon today to try to figure out what's the plan moving forward in the POM and in the EPP to keep this airframe relevant, for the next 50 years maybe. Next chart. I'd probably say my biggest surprise in 3 months of doing this job is how much time I've spent on what I'll call low density, high demand, high visibility programs, and many of the fixed wing programs fall into that exact category. They might be 1 or 2 or 5 airplanes, but they're doing a very unique capability. They're doing a very unique mission in support of ground forces, and I've spent way more time than I would have ever thought dealing with those eaches. I thought I'd be spending lots of time on OIPTs and DABs and ASARCs and CPRs and CS, all the things that we do on that big horse blanket chart that's our acquisition cycle. But I spend most of my time dealing with the little, low density, high demand, high visibility, like fixed wing. So in 2011, we said we were going to stand up a project office, and it was going to take on the responsibility to ensure the safety and airworthiness of the fixed-wing platforms that the Army is responsible for. And that's Brian Tachias took over this job. And you can see when they started, they knew about 250 airplanes that were out there, and now there are about 387, so almost 400 airplanes and counting. And so that's been a challenge for us, and a challenge as we work with the Aviation Engineering Directorate and with the PM for fixed wing and for all of the users of these assets, for us to work together and figure out how to best accomplish the mission and still meet the requirement that the chief signed in the XORD that said do this, and that Ms. Hsu documented in 2 memos that said this is Army policy on how we move forward. But Colonel Tachias and his team have done a fantastic job, and again, I've spent a lot more time than I ever thought I would on this portion of the portfolio. Next chart. This is the other part of the portfolio that I've spent way more time on than I ever thought I would, and it's non-standard rotary wing. And a lot of people think this is the Mi-17 PM, but it's way more than Mi-17. It's Mi-17, it's Mi-35. There's plenty of Bell products up there, AH-1s, 407s, Hueys. We have MD 500s, 530s, 600s. These are all the systems that generally a foreign entity, a foreign government would come to us and say, we would like assistance buying from a U.S. vendor, but the U.S. government doesn't, U.S. Army doesn't operate the system itself. So we don't have a standing structure that delivers sustainment capabilities or airworthiness or safety. So we have to do that inside of the existing structure, but we have to do it in a non-base funded way. So this organization is just about 100% reimbursable. So if some country wants to buy an Mi-35, then Colonel Jim Brashear and his team has to take their dollars and figure out how to execute that program. So big challenge, very, very high visibility. You know, it's almost scary how often Colonel Brashear and his team weekly have telecons at the most senior level within the Army and an OSD over the fact that some country wants to buy some capability, and there's very unique political pressures associated with what Jim does every day. And thank goodness for Jim Brashear, so he takes most of that off my plate. Next chart. So this is Colonel Thomas Todd in the Utility Helicopter Project Office. From a breadth standpoint, he has a lot on his plate, a lot of big programs. So you know we still have A model Blackhawks in the fleet. We still have L model Blackhawks in the fleet. We just had a material development decision to move forward on an L digital project, which is going to be a great capability, and it's a great example of, you know, General Collier talked about reduced funding in the O&M and sustainment world, and we're going through the same thing in the equipping peg on the RDA accounts. And the L Digital program is an example of a program that would never have succeeded, never even had the opportunity to get off the ground if each of us independently would have tried to do that. But our two communities have come together, we've pooled our resources, and we're moving forward on delivering a digital capability to what would not have been a part of our digital fleet. So we have 2,135 Blackhawks, and now we're going to have 760 digital L models, and the rest UH-60Ms when we're finished with the AAO on this. So this is L Digital is a great example of a program that's succeeding through cooperation between the sustaining and the equipping pegs. So that's just one portion of his portfolio. In addition to A's and L's and M's, he's got L Digital. He also has LUH, the Lakota, and he also has ITEP. And I talked a little bit about ITEP earlier, and General Lundy did, and the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army talked about it. Critical, absolutely critical to what we're doing near term from a modernization perspective. It's kind of that, kind of a bridge between the third and the fourth layer of that pyramid that Ms. Hsu talked about. The ability to take a developmental motor and put it in platforms that exist today to extend their reaching capability to bridge us to a future vertical lift capability that could also potentially use this engine and any potential growth within the engine. So ITEP is absolutely critical for the third and the fourth, and I'd even say potentially the fifth piece of that pyramid that Ms. Hsu talked about. Next chart. So UAS, Colonel Tim Baxter, and those of you that were here on the first day saw Rich Kretschmar win QuadA Civilian Employee of the Year. Rich is Tim's deputy. Rich is a great guy, so if you see him, please congratulate him. You know, I had the chance to work, you know, one-on-one on a project for a couple of months with Rich, and absolutely the right selection. A great American, a great person, and we're happy to have him inside of our formation, and we're fortunate to have him working inside of this aviation enterprise. But UAS, this has been a huge growth industry in the last 10 years, will continue to be modernized, and we'll have to continue to explore opportunities here, especially as we go to man-done, man-teaming being critical in the armed reconnaissance role that we're moving to. So teaming Apaches with version 2 of Shadow, with TCDL, and with Gray Eagle is going to be critical from a .mil PF perspective, not just a material development perspective, but how we're going to design, how we're going to fight those systems is going to be critical in the very near term. And so Shadow is currently at Fort Bliss in NIE 14-2, going through its FOT&E. Big challenge. Lieutenant Colonel Scott Anderson is right there with him. He's the product manager, and they're doing very well. So you see we have Ravens and Pumas at the battalion and company level, at the brigade level, Shadows, and then division and above, Gray Eagles and Hunters. And again, a lot of opportunity here. One of the things that's on my plate and on Tim Baxter's plate is to ensure that we have a modernization line specifically for Gray Eagle, because there's some opportunities out there, specifically in that area, for us to extend range, extend dwell possibilities on that system, and we don't want to forego some opportunities that are there. So again, not losing sight on modernization. Next chart. So I think this is my last chart, and so I'll close by saying just about everyone has talked about JMRTD and FVL, and I think about it like this. The JMR tech development, we're going to go through this D-scope where we're going to go down to 2, right? 2 vendors, and those vendors are going to prove their technologies by building something that breaks contact with the ground, right? But it's not going to be something that we're going to throw a squad in and they're going to go, fly 424 kilometers and execute a mission on. They're proving technologies, right? So when I think of JMRTD, a lot of people I think JMRTD is going to end up with something that provides vertical lift that we can put soldiers in and execute a mission the day after. And that's not the case. It's going to prove technologies, and we may select a vendor and say that was perfect, right? But what we may do is say variable speed transmissions, that is a key enabling technology for future vertical lift. We may say, the key development of a certain material to get weight out of the system, that's key. That's a key technology that we're going to migrate over into future vertical lift. So it may be enabling technologies that come out of JMRTD that inform future vertical lift. And so think of future vertical lift as a family of aircraft that when you throw a scatter plot up of all the requirements we have and take the key enabling technologies that JMRTD proved out and then group them together in a way that defines platforms and systems, that's how you think about future vertical lift. In that range from light, medium, heavy, ultra heavy, but not necessarily in those terms, in terms of the operational attributes and the capabilities they bring to the warfight, not how much they weigh, right? The key thing is what combat capabilities by requirement can they deliver? And that's how we'll move forward in a future vertical lift program of record as opposed to a JMRTD. So I started off talking about funding, and I think I'll end up just saying again, the challenges that are in front of us are significant when it comes to funding. And I'll go back to that chart where I look back 10 years and say that the people 10 years ago made the right decisions and executed the programs that they said they would, and that's the reason why we have soldiers who fought and succeeded in combat for the last 10 years. So I challenge everyone in here in your respective lanes to keep that in mind as we move forward in these next 10 years, accepting the decisions that have been made by the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Army, the Chief of Staff of the Army on how we're going to move forward in ARI. How do we execute our programs? How do we command our formations in a way that 10 or 20 years from now we'll look back on it and say, those people in 2014 made the right decision. So, I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words. My first 3 months as the PEO have been fun, tiring, exhausting. I've had great opportunities to engage with people who have informed me, and I spent yesterday bouncing around between a lot of people, and I really sincerely appreciate the time that people are spending with me, because it informs me and helps me as I move forward. And I'm planning on doing that for the rest of today, so look forward to the time that I have set aside for folks today. And please, if I see you on the floor, I look forward to just talking for a few minutes, if that's all we have, to tell me about your thoughts, and that'll help inform me as we move forward. So thanks again for the opportunity, and have a great day. Cool.